Hello, good morning. I'm Vicki Wynn in for Joe Fryer this morning.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now for the children. Breaking news this morning in the fight against COVID-19. The White House sharing with NBC News a new plan to vaccinate kids as young as 5 years old. The exclusive details, including a partnership aimed at getting shots into young people's arms before the holiday season starts. Unanimous, a House panel recommending contempt charges against former Trump advisor Steve Bannon for refusing to cooperate in the Capitol riot investigation. More on the vote and what's next in the case and whether he could end up facing criminal charges. Plus, a new documentary shedding light on what exactly happened that morning of January 6th. We'll talk to the producer about his film, plus the never-before-seen video of how it all went down. Major delay, a shortage of truck drivers impacting shipments nationwide. And it's not just because demand is high. We'll explain why. Also, the new efforts to get a new generation of drivers on the road. And Family Matters, an intimate look at transracial adoptions here in the U.S. and the challenges faced by parents who are adopting for the first time.
What I did then was pour myself into figuring out how should I best parent this child who's going to have a very different experience than what I had.
We'll introduce you to two multiracial families who are navigating their differences and finding common ground for a happy home. And now to some breaking news. NBC has exclusively obtained a critical part of the White House's plan to roll out vaccines for children ages 5 to 11 years old.
Yep, the federal government is partnering with the Children's Hospital Association to prepare at least 100 clinics with vaccines just days before the CDC authorizes the shots. The FDA is expected to meet on October 26th, that's next Tuesday, to vote on the COVID vaccine for kids 11 and under. The CDC will then discuss the final approval on November 2nd and 3rd. If approved by both agencies, the COVID vaccine will be available for kids ahead of the holidays. NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbella joins us now from outside Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. with more on this exclusive report. Heidi, good morning. Tell us about this partnership between the White House and the Children's National Hospital to get kids vaccinated and this head start.
Yeah, good morning, Vicki. This announcement coming within a few hours. NBC News has learned exclusively that a major portion of the White House's plan to get as many children vaccinated as possible before the holidays is to partner with children's hospitals like this one I'm outside here in Washington, D.C., but it won't be limited to this one. It will be at least 100 to 200 children's hospital associations. And doctors say that this is a critical difference with how we approach vaccinating children versus how we approach vaccinating adults. Take a listen to some of the doctors here who are on the front lines.
There's a group of people that want to have that one-on-one conversation with the trusted medical provider, their family members, to just hear more about the experience, see more people getting it, and feel more comfortable with time. And there's a lot of evidence that even just having that conversation, even if you have to do it over and over, can really help people make a decision that's safe for their family.
So the White House believing that it's going to be difficult to get children vaccinated unless it's done by doctors, nurses, and trusted healthcare providers, which is a very different look, guys, than when we had those mass vaccination clinics run by FEMA.
Mm-hmm. Well, the holidays, of course, just around the corner, Heidi. The looming question really remains whether or not the U.S. is going to see another surge in cases. I read an estimated 28 million kids are part of that 5 to 11 age group. So talk about the importance of vaccinating kids, not just to keep the spread of COVID down through the winter, but potentially for good and making it endemic.
Well, look, September, Vicki, really put a rest to the lie that COVID does not affect children. We saw surging cases. We saw surging hospitalizations across the country, particularly in the Deep South. And the White House knows by looking at the data that we cannot put an end to this pandemic unless we have many children vaccinated. But at the same time, they're concerned about parents who even themselves may be vaccinated, who have hesitation or just questions. Take a listen to some of the doctors here who I interviewed.
To get back to normal, a sustainable control of this disease is not possible without covering children. The math just doesn't add up. That's the secondary reason. But it has a benefit not just to adults if children get vaccinated, but for children themselves. So return to normal impacts children themselves, their own education, but also their entertainment and normal life. So they are part of the society and they have a stake in normalization.
So here's the concern. The latest polling shows us good news that 2/3 of parents do plan to get their kids vaccinated. However, when you break that down, only 1/3 say that they want to do it immediately. Another third say they'll wait and see, and 24% say no way. We need numbers higher than that, particularly going into the holiday season, guys.
Yeah, we showed that graphic a little earlier. I was going to bring that up, Heidi, because look at that. The wait and see, 32%. Who knows how long they want to wait and see. Parents are hesitant to vaccinate their children. How are doctors working on the messaging ahead of this upcoming vaccine rollout? What's the White House doing to help with those efforts?
Well, this is really a big part of this plan, is that the messaging will be coordinated between federal officials, HHS, as well as these children's hospitals. And the reason why the children's hospitals are important is because they're not just places where some of the sickest children who would be most at risk for severe case of COVID would come, and you can reach those kids with like immunocompromised systems or diabetes, asthma, but they are also entrees to some of the rural communities that are going to be the ones that will be harder to reach. For instance, I spoke with some doctors in Arkansas about the messaging as well and why this is important. Take a listen to one doctor who herself is a mother and got a little emotional about this moment that we've all been waiting for.
I have to remind myself as a doctor and a mom that as much as I think about coronavirus every day, that's not necessarily the most important thing on everyone's mind. And so I see that day to day in clinic. People have other obligations. They've learned to live within this environment of coronavirus. And so they're making choices to decrease their risk and keep themselves safe. And if this one seems scarier to them, they might just need more time to adjust, to hear more.
So the timing is really important here. If we do see this authorization that comes out the first week of November, we are then running headlong into the holidays with just weeks before the Thanksgiving holiday travel rush. Ladies?
All right, Heidi Preswell, so much information about how this is all going down. Thanks so much this morning. Well, new reports about an expanded COVID vaccine mandate in New York City coming this morning. According to the Wall Street Journal, all city workers will now be required to be inoculated, eliminating COVID testing options for employees who have not been vaccinated. City workers, including all New York City police and firefighters, will need to receive at least one dose of the vaccine by October 29th. Employees who don't comply with the mandate will be placed on unpaid leave and could risk losing their jobs. Mayor Bill de Blasio is expected to make that announcement later today.
Meanwhile, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas is isolating at home this morning after testing positive for COVID-19. A department spokesperson says Mayorkas is fully vaccinated and is experiencing only mild congestion. While he's isolating, he will continue to work from home, and DHS says contact tracing is now underway to check for any other possible exposures. Let's bring in our friend, Dr. Bob Lahita, for all the latest COVID headlines, and we'll go over these last two stories we just discussed. Dr. Lahita is, of course, a professor at the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine and the director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health. Dr. Bob, always great to have you. Good morning. So let's start with that overnight news that I just mentioned. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is isolating at home after testing positive for COVID. Now, we know he was at an outdoor event with the president unmasked. Are the people that attended that event at risk for COVID? What do you think is happening here with the contact tracing?
Well, I think that's pretty scary, and I'm very happy to hear there's contact tracing because Alejandro Mayorkas was without the mask, as was President Biden and a number of other people. Fortunately, if you look at the picture, they were somewhat spread apart, but they were wearing no masks. And of course, outdoors, if you're fully vaccinated, you really don't need to wear the mask, at least in my opinion. And so right now, the contact testing for everybody is very, very important. It is definitely a breakthrough infection, and his symptoms are very mild. And he did get his booster with President Biden.
Dr. Lahita, let's turn now to vaccinations among children and teens. A new CDC study shows the Pfizer vaccine reduced the risk for hospitalization for kids 12 to 18 by 93%. So what should parents be thinking about when they are considering the vaccine and they see numbers like this?
they should be very, very excited about this because, and I heard a previous correspondent of yours saying that the doctors would now be giving the vaccine to the children. I've been saying that since the beginning, that physicians offices should have the vaccine and be able to give it to their patients. I think everyone has a trusted pediatrician for their children, and to have the child get the shot from somebody who you have great faith in gives a certain layer, a patina of security, if you will. The studies, involved kids from southern states. There were the vaccine was 93% effective. There were 464 children studied from various hospitals in the southern states, and many of them, I guess, the vast majority had comorbidities like asthma, diabetes, etc. So it wasn't really. It was kind of a biased group of children, but nevertheless, 93% protected.
Yeah, and Dr. Bob, I do want to ask you about that other piece of news that we just mentioned earlier. We have this new report from the Wall Street Journal that says all New York City public workers will now be required to be vaccinated. This means it's eliminating that testing as an option instead of vaccination. What do you make of this mandate? Is it going to help limit the spread of COVID in the city, especially among, for example, police officers who we know have the lower rate of vaccination?
Yes, it's going to be very, very important. I know that the biggest cause of death in police officers lately has been COVID-19. And by October 29th, some 46,000 workers within the city of New York have to be vaccinated. 71% of them are already vaccinated, and 96% of school workers are vaccinated. So this is really, really important in causing or producing what we call herd immunity. Everybody is going to be protected once we are all vaccinated. And I think that's the most important message we can give.
All right, Dr. Bob Lahita, thank you so much for shedding light on the numbers and the news this morning. We're going to begin with those supply chain issues. We've been bringing you plenty of reporting on these issues, and they're leaving shelves bare. Basic goods are tough to get. Well, one of the reasons for these shortages is a lack of truck drivers. It's been a problem since before the pandemic, but the situation's grown dire recently as a generation of truck drivers hang up their keys and e-commerce drives demand to new heights. NBC News Now correspondent Zincle Esimwa visited a trucking school in Savannah, Georgia, where a new, more diverse generation of drivers are taking the wheel. Good morning, Zincle. Happy to have you with us today. So help us understand just how bad this shortage has become and what's really behind it.
Thanks, Savannah. Yeah, the supply of drivers really is stalling. At the end of 2019, estimates said that around 60,000 truckers were missing from the industry. Now, experts are saying that could near as high as 100,000. And it's for the reasons you're saying. E-commerce has been booming. We spoke with president of Roadmaster Trucking Schools, who told us exactly why.
A lot of 50-something-year-old drivers were retiring early because they didn't want to be on the road risking their life. So as a result, and then on top of that, stimulus checks hit. E-commerce started booming, so now you needed a lot more drivers than you ever did before, and we had less than we ever had before.
And the need is particularly high around the nation's ports. We're currently by the nation's third largest port at Howard Shepherd Container Depot. About 150 trucks are going to come and go here. We're here early in the morning, but you can already see the trucks moving. And there are around 400 containers. And so truckers go to the ports, they bring items to these containers, and then more trucks come and come from the containers to your front door. So clearly demand is very high at this point.
Yeah, everything that we get comes to us one way or another by truck and that final mile. Zincle, the demographics are changing. We referenced it a little bit earlier. Older white men typically made up that population, but what are you seeing as you're visiting the trucker schools now?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. We're seeing a lot of diversity, not just in terms of racial ethnicity, but also gender. I spoke with one man, Bernard. He's 40 years old and a parent, and he said, I'm here to support my family, right? But we're also seeing this industry is unique in pay equity. Truckers are paid by the mile, so the gender disparity with pay is a lot different, and the hours and flexibility are much better. In this case of Roadmaster Trucking School, the course is just 4 weeks long, and after that, students can take a test and get their commercial driver's license, so the bridge for entry is also a lot lower.
So tell us more about what these students are telling you about why they're getting into this business. What's making them decide that they want to go into trucking?
Yeah, I think that was the best part of our conversations with students. We heard from one former pizza delivery driver, Palmer. He's in his 20s. He said, I'm tired of making $8 an hour, and he wanted to explore another industry. He joined a bit skeptical, but now he's actually recruiting his friends. And I spoke with one woman, Sydney, who told us about her family and why this has been so important for her. Let's take a listen.
Being that I am a mother of two and that I want to make sure that my children, like I said, don't have to worry about anything, don't have to, deal with the struggle that I've seen my mom having to deal with growing up, wondering if the lights are going to be on or if we're going to have a roof over our head or food on the table.
It's clear these drivers are very hopeful about what trucking will do for them, and it's at a time when the industry needs them the most.
Absolutely. A time when the industry needs them the most. We're all going to be looking to these types of deliveries as we head into the holiday season. So certainly an important report. And Zing Clay, you're a new addition to the NBC News team, specifically here at Now. This is your first appearance on Morning News Now. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the family. So happy to have you on the show.
Welcome, Zing Clay. Former Trump aide Steve Bannon is one step closer to potentially facing charges for refusing to reply to a congressional subpoena. The January 6th Select Committee has voted to recommend contempt charges against him. The committee's vote was unanimous, 9-0, for defying the panel's request for information related to the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol.
Mr. Bannon stands alone in his complete defiance of our subpoena. That's not acceptable. No one in this country, no matter how wealthy or how powerful, is above the law.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitali joins us now from Washington. Hey, good morning, Ali. We have the committee's recommendation now. What comes next, and what happens if Bannon refuses to comply again?
Well, look, that's a pretty stunning moment last night. Somber mood in the chamber as they voted to hold him in contempt of Congress. What it does is it officially kicks off a process that you and I and Savannah have been talking about for many weeks now, since Steve Bannon was served that subpoena, and it was clear that he was not going to comply. What happens now is that the committee has made this referral. It will now go to the full floor of Congress for a vote. That's going to happen on Thursday. And if the full floor decides to vote this out, if it passes, it will then go to the Department of Justice, where they will decide whether or not to prosecute. The President Biden has said that he thinks that people like Bannon should face prosecution on this. At the same time, though, the DOJ is a separate entity. Congress people on this committee have said repeatedly that they have been trying to say that they think that this is what should be done, but letting the Justice Department make their own decisions on this. I will say, though, we all know this. Once it starts getting into the courts, this is when things start getting a little bit slower. For the committee's purposes, they would like this to happen as quickly as possible because they are on a clock here. We often talk about the midterms like they are so far off in the future, and they are, unless you're this congressional committee who's about to get into the legal weeds, and they are still on a clock here because as long as Democrats have the House, they can move forward on this in the way that they would like to, continuing to investigate. But if Republicans were to retake the House in 2022, this investigation would likely be neutered.
Yeah, the wheels of justice can move slowly. And in fact, the Justice Department hasn't indicted someone in circumstances like this since 1983. What are you hearing from lawmakers this morning, Ali?
Yeah. Well, look, again, they were somber about this last night because you have to think about what this entire committee is about. It's easy to forget as we get mired in the politics, but it's about January 6th, a deadly and tragic day in American history. That's something that one of the two Republicans on this committee, Liz Cheney, no stranger to drawing the ire of the president, she reminded her Republican colleagues of this yesterday in her remarks before the vote. Listen to how she said it.
Almost every one of my colleagues knows in your hearts that what happened on January 6th was profoundly wrong. You all know that there is no evidence of widespread election fraud sufficient to have changed the results of the election. You all know that the Dominion voting machines were not corrupted by a foreign power. You know these claims are false.
You know who's still pushing those claims, though? former President Donald Trump, who still has such a stronghold on the entire Republican Party. I would note, though, Republican leader Mitch McConnell yesterday in a press conference with some of us reporters did say that he doesn't think it's helpful to continue looking to the past. Instead, he wants to look forward. His goal, of course, is to retake the Senate in the same way that Kevin McCarthy's goal is to retake the House. They're taking two very different ways of doing that, though, because for McConnell, he doesn't want to continue relitigating 2020. But if you go to a Trump rally, that is basically all the former president does. So it's going to become a problem for Republicans. It already is a problem for Republicans. Liz Cheney trying to remind them the foundation of democracy here was very much at stake on January 6th.
A lot of questions about accountability and consequences. Ali Vitali, thank you so much this morning.
Now, the desperate operation to free 17 kidnapped missionaries in Haiti continues. And this morning, we're learning more about the families at the center of this crisis. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins us now from Miami. He's been following this story. Sam, good morning. What's the latest here? What have we learned?
Yeah, Savannah, Vicky, good morning. Good to be with you. We now know that a Michigan couple and their 5 children were all abducted, guys, with the exception of a father who is now waiting to learn the fate of his family. The gang that took them is demanding a $17 million ransom, but FBI experts say that is money that should not be paid.
In this western Michigan neighborhood, they're praying for a family whose pastor says they visited Kenya and third world countries, but never Haiti until now.
We have a heart for people, and they were there because of that reason, because it's a very disadvantaged area, and our denomination is very quick to reach out and help.
A church member says the family of 7, 2 parents and 5 kids, all under 18 except for one, knew the risks, but went to the Caribbean country anyway to see how they could help. Now, all of them kidnapped except for the father.
I would say they're very genuine. They are loving people. They had a heart for missions.
Now, they're part of a group of 17 people kidnapped by a local gang demanding a $17 million ransom for their release, first reported by the Wall Street Journal.
We don't want to give these individuals money because this will further fuel their criminal enterprise.
Former FBI Special Agent in Charge Tim Gallagher says conditions in this case are working against the gang members.
The bad guys who took these kids, they require a lot of resources to keep them healthy.
Haiti has been upended by a lack of food, medicine, and any semblance of structure. Dr. Margaret Degas, who works at this hospital in Port-au-Prince, calls it a gangland.
Every level of the society, even the kids of people that sell things along the streets, okay, they are being kidnapped. So the situation has never been as bad as it is.
If you don't pay a ransom, what happens to the hostages?
Oh, very often the people are killed. It's a question of life or death.
And with respect to the ransom request, it is U.S. government policy not to pay in cases like this. But, guys, that does not prevent families or others from putting up the money if they have it. But obviously, that is a whole lot of money. Back to you.
Absolutely. Sam, thank you so much. Now it's time for a check on your Morning News Now weather, which means that Bill Cairns joins us. Hi, Bill. Good morning.
All right, who's ready to do a little bit of learning on a Wednesday? I know you guys want to pay close attention.
Does this come with a quiz, though?
And learn about no quiz.
Okay,
maybe tomorrow.
all right, then I'm ready.
So we're gonna learn about atmospheric rivers. Okay,
Great.
Atmospheric rivers. What is that? So yes, exactly. These are the events that give the West Coast huge rainfall events. And sometimes they go all the way from Hawaii to the West Coast. So this is above. This is where the jets fly. Usually all the humid air shown in yellow is where, that's where all the tropical air is. But occasionally some of it gets drawn up to the West Coast. And we call these atmospheric rivers. And as I mentioned, these are usually big rainfall events. So we have one ongoing now. You see that narrow ribbon of the green in there. So this is a moderate rain event that's happening now. But the one this weekend is going to be stronger. You can see the yellow and the green extending across the Pacific there. That one could bring us some significant flooding, and that'll come in as we head towards the maybe Saturday night and mostly on Sunday. And there is a climate connection to this. Atmospheric rivers are expected to become more common as we warm our planet. So here's the one today. It's not a huge ordeal, but you can see the rain that's in California, some snow at the highest of elevations. That is all great news. But when we add it together with the one we're expecting this weekend, we could get up to 10 inches in the mountains, especially all those areas of yellow are at least 3 inches. We We have 18 large fires still burning. 8 of them are in California. And so this will put a lot of those fires out. So that's fantastic news. But we do have to worry about those burn scars from the fires earlier this year. And because of that, we could get some debris flows and some mudslides this upcoming weekend. So the forecast for today, I didn't mention the east a lot. That's because it's gorgeous. Get outside and enjoy lunch today. 70s all the way up through New England.
Love to hear that. And it's Wednesday. Of course I know it's Wednesday. Look, we're both wearing pink. So next hour, I'm assuming we'll talk about the weekend. And I'll be prepared for your quiz, Bill.
Weekend forecast coming your way.
All right.
That's
Thanks, Bill. And coming up, an incredible survival story for everyone on board this private plane. We'll tell you how all 21 passengers were able to escape after it crashed and went up in flames. And also breaking news out of Buckingham Palace on the health of Queen Elizabeth. Details next up on Morning News Now. Welcome back. Federal investigators are looking into a plane crash outside of Houston. Now, despite a massive fire that consumed the large passenger plane, everyone survived. NBC News aviation correspondent Tom Costello has more from the scene.
On a Houston runway, moments of sheer terror.
It is a passenger airplane.
It happened just after 10 a.m. A private passenger plane fully engulfed in flames at Houston's executive airport as emergency teams quickly converged on the scene.
19 people on board, possibly 21 people on board. There are multiple people off of the plane.
Amazingly, everyone escaped. 3 crew members and 18 passengers, the youngest a 10-year-old child. 2 people suffered minor injuries.
They were stunned. They were very, very stunned, but they did all self-extricate. We can't tell you how they did that.
Authorities say the plane, an MD-87 registered to a local investment firm, was thought to be headed to Boston, but the plane never got off the ground.
The actual airplane rolled down the runway, struck an actual fence, and from there became disabled.
The plane involved 34 years old. No U.S. airline still flies the MD-80 series of planes. The cause of today's crash unknown. But what investigators find could be crucial to the few foreign airlines that still fly it. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
Now to that school board firestorm in Southlake, Texas. Days after NBC News first reported a school administrator's comments on the Holocaust, teachers and the community are taking out their frustrations in a public forum. This new controversy comes after the district gained national attention over its diversity plan. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton has the details.
About divisive. You say that I'm divisive, you're divisive.
In Southlake, tensions high yet again at a school board meeting.
I was subject to a rash of bullying, almost all of which was anti-Semitic in nature. I received everything from jokes about my nose to gas chambers.
Jake Berman, former Southlake student who is Jewish, opened up about past bullying so severe he says he contemplated suicide. His parents eventually pulling him from the school.
The blame is right here in this room.
The meeting, the first time residents could publicly raise concerns after the district sent teachers guidance to vet all books, instructing them to not allow singular narratives that could be considered offensive.
Please help restore my faith in this district and in the school board.
All of it in response to a new Texas law prohibiting teachers from offering perspectives that could make students feel anguish or guilt. Last week, NBC News obtained exclusive, secretly recorded audio. In it, the director of curriculum, Gina Petty, told educators to balance books about the Holocaust with an opposing view.
And make sure that if you have a book on the Holocaust, that you have one that has opposing, that has other.
How do you oppose the Holocaust? Gina Petty did not respond to messages requesting comment. In response to Petty's remark, Carroll's superintendent issued an apology, stating there are not two sides of the Holocaust and pledging to work with his staff to clarify the policy. Parents expressed concern about the controversy.
The teacher who was reprimanded over the book, those teachers who recorded the training session, and the administrator are all victims of this toxic environment.
Berman urging more needs to be done to protect students and teachers.
This is a crossroads for the state and for this district. One path is an opportunity to lead and be on the right side of history. The other will cost you and your children a quality education.
A message he hopes leads to a brighter future for all. Antonia Hilton, NBC News, New York.
And you can hear more of Antonia's reporting on the tensions in Southlake in our NBC News podcasts. All episodes are now streaming wherever you find your podcasts. Let's now take a look at what is making news around the world this morning. Matt Bodner joins us today from Moscow. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, guys. Well, let's start things off today with some breaking news out of the UK, where Buckingham Palace says that the Queen has reluctantly accepted some medical advice to lay low for a few days, get some rest, but also cancel an upcoming trip to Northern Ireland. The palace has not given any further information about what actually prompted this advice, but they did say that the Queen is in good spirits and is disappointed that she will not be able to make that trip. Moving along now to Brazil, where senators met last night to discuss plans to recommend indicting President Bolsonaro on criminal charges that essentially amount to, failing to lead an effective pandemic response. The Associated Press has seen a copy of the report they're preparing, and it recommends 11 specific charges ranging from charlatanism to genocide. So some of the senators who are on the relevant committee working on this specifically oppose that later charge, but we'll keep an eye on this one. And finally, we have some animal news, though I do apologize in advance for what you're about to see. Researchers in China have discovered the fossilized remains of a dog-sized sea scorpion.
Oh my.
Don't worry, the species died out a long time ago, long time ago. But these scorpions, when they were alive, could grow to be over 3 feet long. And the team that discovered the fossils say that they could have been a top predator in the waters of southern China. I have no doubt about that. And that would have been about more than 400 million years ago. So that is, I guess, the good news here.
Okay, I was going to ask dog-sized. Like, are we talking teacup poodle or are we talking a Labrador retriever? But 3 feet long is pretty intense. Matt, we like animal news. That's not exactly the variety that we like. But thank you so much. Good to see you.
Me too.
Yeah. Coming up, 4 hours at the Capitol. Up next, we'll talk to the producer of a new documentary which focuses on the morning of January 6th and what happened as protests turned into an all-out riot. This is Morning News Now. Dr. Rachel Levine made history yesterday, becoming the first openly transgender 4-star officer across any of the country's uniformed services. The Assistant Secretary for Health was sworn in yesterday to the rank of Admiral in the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps, making her the highest-ranking officer in the department. Levine is a pediatrician who previously served as Pennsylvania's health secretary before joining the federal government. After the ceremony, she said, quote, "May this appointment today be the first of many more to come as we create a diverse and more inclusive future." Now, it's been more than 9 months since the attack on the U.S. Capitol. While lawmakers on the January 6th Commission move forward with their investigation, we're now getting a minute-by-minute look at what happened that day. That's in a new documentary called 4 Hours at the Capitol, and it's out today on HBO and HBO Max. It's giving us a new look at the insurrection from those who were there. Take a look.
January 6th started off pretty much like any other day. It wasn't until I started listening to the speeches that I felt that day was going to be a bad day.
You have to show strength, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
I work in what should be one of the most secure buildings in the whole world.
It just never occurred to me that a mob would get into the Capitol building.
Joining us now is the executive producer of that documentary, Dan Reed. Dan, good morning. Thank you so much. Congratulations on this film being out today, and we are happy to be discussing it with you this morning. So obviously, we've all had a lot of questions about that day. There's an investigation going on. We all watched what was unfolding in shock. But as a filmmaker, what made you want to explore more deeply, more in depth, what happened on January 6th?
It's an event that everyone knows about, and it just happens to have been one of the most videoed events in history. Mm-hmm. So the opportunity for us as filmmakers was clear, but we wanted to narrow down the focus of our storytelling to, the 4 hours when really everything hung in the balance, the 4 hours of maximum violence from when the first barricades were overrun. And so what this film does is it takes you through those 4 hours from, just before 1 p.m. Until really the tide of the battle turned. And it tells the story through the extraordinary wealth of video archive, but also through the eyes of people who were directly involved. And that means rioters, and legislators and police officers, many interviews that you've never seen before with people who haven't spoken yet. So it's really immersive, and it takes you through step by step what happened and how violent it was.
Absolutely. I actually want to play a little bit of one of those interviews so people here can see and get a little preview. You got to speak with lawmakers and officers on the front lines, as you mentioned. So first, here's one officer and how he detailed his experience outside the Capitol building. Let's listen, and I'll ask you a question on the other side.
I think if we had pulled our weapons and started shooting, I think there would have been a large loss of life, maybe on both sides. It felt like we were 100 to 1. Officers were falling off the line. They were bleeding. They were injured. I mean, I was terrified that if they broke our lines, they were going to be able to encircle our officers, kind of pick them off one by one.
Dan, one of the things that has struck me since we've heard accounts of this day is the fact that many officers actually say that they think it could have been much worse, despite what we saw, despite the violence we saw. What was it like to hear directly from these officers who defended the Capitol, and did anything surprise you?
I was shocked by just how overwhelmed they felt, and these are officers who are experienced and I guess tough guys. And they really felt they were fighting for their lives, in particular in the West Terrace Tunnel, which was the key choke point where really a small number of Capitol and DC police officers held off a vast crowd of many, many thousands of rioters who, if they had penetrated the Capitol building, would have caused, I think, a huge amount of chaos and led to a much worse outcome.
And Dan, before I let you go, I mean, those officers were just discussing defending the Capitol outside. There were hundreds of people inside, including lawmakers, congressional staffers, journalists. We heard one of the sound bites there saying, it's of course supposed to be expected to be a super safe building. What did they have to say about that day being essentially trapped inside the Capitol as rioters were outside and then eventually in the halls?
The Senate and the House were still sitting when rioters at 13 minutes past 2 broke into the building. I found that extraordinary. I mean, legislators were terrified, and I think with good reason. There could have been a lot of violence in the chamber, and they were lucky to get out alive, I think.
Absolutely. Dan Reed, I'm looking forward to seeing this film. I've already loved the little bits that I've been able to see in preparation for this conversation with you. Thank you for your time this morning. We so appreciate it. And 4 Hours at the Capitol is now on HBO and HBO Max, and we are appreciative of this preview. Thanks again, Dan.
Good.
And coming up, a 12-year-old girl still dealing with symptoms 1 year after recovering from COVID-19. More on how she says her life has changed. That's next on Morning News Now. Patients with long COVID deal with a variety of symptoms: fever, headaches, fatigue. But it's not just adults suffering from this. NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez caught up with a 12-year-old whose entire life has been turned upside down after having COVID more than a year ago.
Before COVID, I was very energetic and I was doing cheer.
Wednesday's life looks nothing like it did 13 months ago.
I miss being able to go out and do more.
A month after recovering from COVID last year, she was diagnosed with post-acute COVID-19, also known as long COVID. Her mom, Melissa, says Wednesday continues to show symptoms on and off.
It's been something different almost every time.
Wednesday has had 23 waves of long COVID symptoms this year. They've ranged from lethargy and headaches to fevers.
The fever will sometimes go up to 103.4, stay up for a week like that.
And worse.
The seizure came out of nowhere. She was sitting at just doing her work on her computer, and she had a seizure.
Wednesday says it's impacted every aspect of her life, including her longtime passion.
Just recently, I had to push myself away from cheer for a little bit because mentally and physically, I was just drained.
But aside from her unpredictable health, her mom says keeping up with school and getting the extra support she needs has been the biggest challenge.
We put her back last year for the second semester in person because she really wanted to go. It was very difficult. It's my assumption that they really didn't believe her.
In August, Wednesday started at a new school in Mount Holly, North Carolina.
Going into this year to get the accommodations right, it's been a battle. And she is now on homebound accommodation. hopefully we're on the right track.
We reached out to the Gaston County School District where Wednesday goes to school, but they did not provide a comment. What the Lynches are experiencing is not unique.
Some kids have had trouble working with their schools as far as believing that their symptoms are real, because a lot of times they're nonspecific. It's fatigue, it's mental health complaints, difficulty struggling with schoolwork.
Dr. Amanda Morrow is the co-director at the Kennedy Krieger Institute's Pediatric Post-COVID-19 Clinic in Baltimore. They provide a holistic approach to treat patients with long COVID. Their team includes specialists like a pediatric neurologist, a behavioral psychologist, a social worker, and the most recent addition, an educator.
I think the schools need to understand that this is a real syndrome, long COVID, and we need to advocate more for these kids and also educate the schools more on what this condition looks like and also different strategies that may be helpful for these kids while they are recovering.
In July, the Department of Education released guidance and resources on when a child experiencing long COVID could be eligible for school accommodations, like extended time or modified instruction. The DOE told NBC News in a statement, any family that believes their child is not receiving adequate support from their child's school can contact local and state government civil rights agencies or can file a complaint with the department's Office for Civil Rights. As of October 7th, over 6 million children have tested positive for COVID-19 since the onset of the pandemic, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. But there's little research on how COVID-19 might affect people and children in the long run.
We don't know what's going to happen 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 6 months down the road at this point.
Melissa is now an ambassador for Long COVID Kids, an advocacy and support group for families dealing with new COVID diagnoses and long COVID.
I cry because I know what she was like before. The immediate goal is to get her out of this relapse that's been going on for almost a month. Long term, I want her back normal. I've been doing this for 13 months, and it's hard. Parents of long COVID kids need support.
All right, our thanks to Isa Gutierrez for that report. And now it is time for one of our favorite segments, your weekly checkup. And NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres joins us right here on set. It's always so great to see you, and actually now in person. It's been a little while.
This is great to be here.
Yeah, so good to have you, and you know we love this segment. So let's jump into it. This one is pretty important, impactful for parents. The University of Michigan poll reveals children are developing their social media habits at younger ages. How old are we talking? What do parents need to know?
And we're talking 7 to 9-year-olds are already on social media, and I think most parents realize that.
Yeah.
But what the story is talking about is that they're on social media, and parents aren't necessarily doing the parental controls that are available to them. And as a matter of fact, half of children 10 to 12, a third of children 7 to 9 are already on social media. And like I said, I think most parents know that. But here's the deal. 1 in 5 parents actually had trouble getting parental controls, figuring out parental controls. And they also said, a lot of these parents said, you know, my children, I know they can identify adults, but half the parents said, I'm not sure they can identify adults. I'm not sure they understand what's fake, what's true in that thing. And those parental controls are very important. So doctors' orders are essentially to, number one, be aware that your child is going to be on social media. That is their future. That is their life. And on top of that, talk to them about the benefits of social media, which we know, especially for them, there are going to be some benefits, but also the hazards of social media, and especially the fact that there could be people on there who you think are kids but are adults, and there could be some people in there, unfortunately, with some bad intentions.
Oh, absolutely. I've got a story coming up today on the Today Show about that. All right, now, Dr. John, here's another one for parents. Interesting language here. The American Academy of Pediatrics says, quote, parent training in behavior management should be the first line of treatment when it comes to ADHD. Walk us through that.
And right, and they have said that for a while. And we know with ADHD, the diagnosis of that has gone up since the 90s, and it continues to go on the rise. But the American Academy of Pediatrics has actually said they want that behavior management, especially parental training in behavioral management over medication. That behavior therapy, though, the rates are still low. As a matter of fact, in one study, they found out only 11% of people were actually getting that behavior training, and instead they were the kids were being put on medication. So doctors' orders are essentially, number one, and this is what I tell people all the time, if your child gets diagnosed or somebody says we think they have ADHD, double check that diagnosis. It could be something as simple as they're the youngest person in their class, and so the teacher might think they have ADHD, you know, that type of thing. So make sure that that diagnosis is a solid diagnosis.
By getting a second one?
By getting a second diagnosis, or just asking them for more testing, the doctor, whoever's doing that diagnosis, whoever's doing it. And then ask the doctor about medication-less trainings, things you can do. That behavior management training is extremely important. And it's important that parents understand, and parents themselves get trained in how to deal with a child who possibly has ADHD. That's the key. Absolutely. Really important advice, especially for a lot of parents who I'm sure don't want their kids on medicine that they don't necessarily need. All right, finally, Dr. John, here's an interesting one. This is actually a study out of the UK, but it might have some takeaways for our veterans here in the U.S. So soldiers dealing with risk-taking, obviously, in the line of duty, that might have an impact on gambling. Walk us through this. And, you know, I'm a veteran, 32 years in the military, and you know as a person in the military that you take risks. That's what the military do. But what this study found out in the UK is that the veterans are 11 times more likely to have gambling affect their lives than the general population. We know this does not just apply to veterans in the UK. I work with UK veterans and UK military personnel. They are identical to what we do here, and so it's going to apply to us as well here. The study was done, again, on these UK vets, but it does apply here to veterans, especially 30 to 39-year-olds in this study were the ones they mainly looked at. And so here are the doctor's orders. The doctor's orders are essentially, you want to look out for risk-taking behaviors and patterns in veteran family members because they could be taking these risks they don't even really necessarily know they're doing. On top of that, you want to make sure that gambling isn't just the tip of the iceberg, because it turns out that not just gambling, but problems with police, debt issues, those kinds of things affect them as well. If they need help, get them help. Oh, absolutely. Great advice, of course, because of your medical professional opinion, but also from your own experience as a veteran. Dr. John, thank you for being on set with us. Thank you for your service to our country. And always thank you for joining us for our weekly medical roundup. We love it. All right, we'll see you soon. Now it's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you. And Seema Modi is with us this morning. Hey, Seema, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Savannah. Facebook is planning to rebrand itself with a new name as soon as next week. The Verge is reporting that the move would be in order to align Facebook's brand more towards the so-called metaverse that CEO Mark Zuckerberg wants to create, and less on its namesake social network. The new name would likely be similar to what Google did back in 2015 when it named its parent company Alphabet, with a search engine and other businesses under a broad umbrella. Sticking with social media, Snap CEO Evan Spiegel says social media companies must take responsibility for their own services instead of waiting for new laws. Spiegel says regulation isn't a substitute for moral responsibility in business practices that support users' health and well-being. Now, his comments appear to be a shot at Facebook, which has come under fire after a former employee leaked documents showing Facebook was aware Instagram was harmful to teens. Now, in response to the backlash, Facebook says it would halt development of Instagram for kids. Spiegel says there's no plans for a Snapchat for kids, but the company is building a family center feature for parents and children. Gas prices on the rise and could be around for a while. The average cost of regular unleaded hitting $3.32 a gallon yesterday. That's according to Gas Buddy, and that's the highest level since 2014. Global demand for oil remaining very high while supplies are tight. Crude does account for about half of the cost of gas, and experts say there are ways to save, including shopping around. They say there can be big price swings between gas stations, and of course the price can also differ depending on what state you're driving in, Savannah. Yeah, sometimes you see that right across the street from each other with crazy different prices. All right, Seema, thank you so much. Good to see you. And coming up, all in the family, a look at how transracial adoption has changed over the years and how families today are working to address the challenges of living in a multiracial home. You're watching Morning News Now. Now to an important story we've been mentioning all morning. Transracial adoption has changed dramatically over the last 2 decades. We want to introduce you to 2 families and their experiences growing up in a multiracial home.
Oh my. Honey, hi, sweetheart. Oh, it's so good to see you. I knew from an early age that something was different. I would get made fun of all the time, like, oh, your parents are white, you're black, you talk this way, like, why are you doing that? It didn't really take a toll on me until probably high school. That's when it really started to form my feelings of anger and sadness and me being confused.
It says on the back, Kyle's arrival, 5/19/91.
There's these kids, and there's not enough families out there.
Kyle's parents adopted him from foster care when he was 9 months old. They have a daughter who was also adopted and another son who is biological.
There were ways in which I would find myself being tone deaf. And it would be really, really helpful to stop and learn and not be that tone deaf way again. I agree that there are things that black parents can give to black children that white parents cannot give. That doesn't mean white parents can't be parents to black children. It just means they have to recognize that there are ways that they cannot parent.
Transracial adoption in the U.S. has changed dramatically over the last 2 decades. Adoption from foster care reached an all-time high in 2019, with interracial adoptions from the system increasing by 58% from the early 2000s, while international adoption, the majority of which is transracial, has decreased by about 80% over roughly the same time period.
I felt unprepared. I felt like I didn't have the tools. What I did then was pour myself into figuring out how should I best parent this child who's going to have a very different experience than what I had and what Tim had.
Robin and Tim adopted their son Ben from Ethiopia when he was 4.
Oh, the dinosaur ate the banana?
Yeah. Eat that banana.
They also have 3 biological daughters.
Did Lily teach you that?
With Ben, there are a few extra things you need to be aware of because of your race. Things will happen at school, say, and I'll ask him questions where I'm trying to deduce without implying whether I think there was any kind of implicit bias going on. And he says, no. His perspective is still very innocent despite being 15.
No, Ben, I'm disabled.
It's not how you look at other people. It's how they look at you. So that's what we're trying to get through.
Hands up, don't shoot! Hands up, don't shoot!
I have a friend in particular who I reached out to shortly, I think, after Michael Brown was killed. I didn't want any black man to have to do the work for me, but I needed to hear from somebody who had the lived experience. Was I doing it right? Should I say something? Should I not say something?
I was just like, whatever, and I would just like push it away, just because I was still a little young, you know. I didn't really understand why they would do that and all that stuff. But now that I'm older, I understand a lot more.
It matters that he is a black man and that he understands that color is seen. And to say that all people are the same or that, I don't see color, it denies someone's experience. It denies the power component that's involved in racism that's very, very present in our culture and our country still.
Wow, what a powerful report there and such an honest conversation with that family.
Yeah, I loved everything that they had to say because it brought such a different perspective. And I think it's true that love knows no color, but it is about recognizing culture and race.
And someone's,
that's part of someone's
experience.
Identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.